Alrighty, here we are. Webinar number 3 of our mini webinar series. Let me just set my clock so I respect your time well. Excellent. I am Steve Joordens. I love to teach large classes. Always have. I enjoy the vibe of a large class, but I also really take the mission seriously to give the students a really deep and meaningful educational experience. So those of you that have been part of these webinars already know that the purpose of these webinars is just to show some of the really cool things that you can do in a very large class. And in fact, in some cases, you can do them better than the traditional way. And I think that'll be a theme we'll carry through today as we're talking about teaching students how to both give quality feedback and how to learn from feedback well. So skipping ahead a little bit, let me just really start here. This is the third of 3 mini webinars we gave over the last little bit. Webinar 1 was focused on writing and how you can bring writing into a large class in a very powerful pedagogical way. Webinar 2, which was just a couple days ago, was focused on how you can have your students giving presentations or demonstrations in a very large class and how using video can help you do that. Today, it's all about feedback. And so those of you who attended today, you will get links to the previous 2 webinars if you would like to check them out. And also let me just say at the outset here that if you have any questions or whatever, you can use the Q&A button here, and Tessa and Dwayne are here as well. They will probably answer some of your questions on the fly. And at the end, I will leave about 10 minutes for a little bit of a back and forth between all of us. All right, cool. Let's get at it then. So all about feedback today. So we're going to talk about it, of course, in the context of peerScholar, which is the tool that we've been talking about, a peer assessment, an online peer assessment platform that really allows you to do some of these things in a very powerful way. So just to kind of make sure everyone's oriented again back within that context, let me just kind of describe that context. It involves 3 steps. In the first step, students are asked to create some form of composition. And in the previous webinars, we really talked a lot about this part of things, that maybe they could be asked to write, or maybe they could be asked to submit some other digital composition like a video, for example. But whatever it is, they submit a composition of some sort. And then they go to step 2, which is a round of peer assessment. So in step 2, they see some of the work of their peers. It's been randomly selected, it's presented anonymously, and they are asked to rate that work, assess it in some way, and, which we'll really be focusing on today, provide constructive feedback intended to guide improvement. So a very pro-social thing. Tell your peer something they can do that would make their work better. So this is, again, all about giving good constructive feedback. Now, while students are doing that to their peers, an equal number of peers are doing the same to their work. So in the third step of the process, students see the feedback that's been applied to their work by their peers, and they're asked to assess that feedback, and they may also be asked to use that feedback to guide a formative revision. So notice that in these two steps, steps 2 and 3, it is all about students first giving good feedback and then trying to get what they can out of feedback. And this is part of every peerScholar activity. So anytime you use peerScholar, they're going to be doing this. What we're going to talk about today is some of the ways you can really enrich that and really give students a very valuable and useful experience with this whole feedback process. Okay, so let's jump into the feedback. Now, let's just start right with these little stats up on the right here. This is with respect to giving feedback to others, and it comes from a survey of 850 managers, and they basically show things like this, that 50% of these managers are uncomfortable addressing sensitive topics with others, such as poor performance or ineffective work practices. 44% are uncomfortable bringing up someone's negative or counterproductive behaviors, and 30% find it unnatural to give feedback to others in a way that's honest yet constructive. Okay, so giving this constructive feedback is not a comfortable thing to do. And especially if you don't do it well, then it becomes really uncomfortable. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why that is and how to help students do it well. So with respect to all the text, let's just focus on, like the the last two sentences. Part of having engaged employees is ensuring they're provided with opportunities for growth and development. It's kind of, something that's very important in the workforce and in life in general. Feedback helps us grow and develop. Feedback, specifically positive and constructive feedback, has been shown to improve job performance. It is the path through growth, right? People telling us how we can be better, if they do it well, can really give us valuable information for improvement. So how do we learn to do it well? For the most part, in the higher education system, we do not give our students very much practice doing this at all, let alone really teaching them how to do well. But we can. It is possible, and it's possible to do even in our largest classes. Okay, so let's start then and tell that story, but focus on this part of the question first, giving effective feedback to others. Okay, now recall that this is what step 2 of the peerScholar process is all about. Seeing the work of a bunch of your peers, and let's imagine 5 or 6 peers, and giving them constructive feedback as part of the peer assessment. So I'm going to show you how that works. But before I do, I just want to highlight 2 ways in which we can really support this in peerScholar and really make it a powerful learning experience. The first one I'm calling calibration, calibrating prior to assessment. I'm using the term a little differently than some, but the idea here is before we ask them to do this, to give constructive feedback, within peerScholar, we have the opportunity just before they do that to guide them in that, to give them a good learning experience that does sort of 2 things. A, educate them about what good feedback is, and B, kind of have them all coming at this task from a common ground. So in that sense, being calibrated, that all students are seeing this, and now hopefully the way they give feedback is a little bit more consistent with one another. So I'll show you how we do that, and this is going to be mostly within the instructions. And then while they're giving the feedback itself, we can also scaffold that. And again, I'm using the term a little differently. I don't necessarily mean, building layers as you do in some scaffolded assignment. What I mean here is more we can give them some structure and support while they're actually giving the feedback to help them do it well. Okay, so nice abstract concepts. Let me show you what we mean here. So I've got 2 peerScholar windows open, and I may go back and forth between 2 of them. This front one here is the student experience. The back one will be the instructor experience, so I can show you how some of these things are set up. But let's jump in as a student, and I'm going to go into a class, and I'm going to jump into an assess phase. Okay, so imagine I submitted something already. Now I'm coming in, and I'm going to be assessing my peers. Okay, so the first thing that happens when we get to this assess phase is we see these instructions open up. And this is actually a very powerful opportunity. Our instruction boxes allow you to use any digital media you would like. So for example, here we can start by saying, okay, it's your turn to be the teacher. We give them a sense of the task. You're going to see your peer work and you're going to assess it. But notice the second paragraph. I don't know how well you can see it on your screen, so let me just read it. So what does good critical feedback look like? Before going any further, please watch this short video that is intended to help managers learn how to give good feedback to their employees. Bracket, this is the skill you are learning here. I like to connect things to the real world so that students see the relevance of what they're doing and what they're learning. Your feedback will be assessed by your peers based on the points raised in this video. So your feedback is going to be assessed. So watch this video and learn. And so I'll just give you a taste.
Delivering negative feedback to your employees can be awkward, uncomfortable, and let's face it, a little intimidating. As a manager,
all right, so you get the sense. She's going to walk through some of the characteristics. I'm also just showing you can also do other things here. So here I'm connecting with an institutional website. This is actually a University of Waterloo website that I happen to find that laid things out pretty well. But this one also talks about aspects of powerful feedback and what it looks like. So the point being here, we can give them a lot of resources and get them started. The rest of these instructions basically walk them through the process that they're going to be involved with. So I won't worry too much about that. But this is the calibration part. So now they come into this task of giving constructive feedback, but they've all had some training and they were all coming at it in the same way. All right, so now they read, this is Peer 1's submission here in this context of a written submission. On the right is where we're going to ask them to assess, and we're going to guide their assessment. We can give them a lot of structure as they do things, and you're going to see some examples of these tools. But for example, one of the things we could do is start them by just saying, okay, you just read that. If you had to give it a grade, what grade would you give it? And that's a good general way to get students thinking about the relative strength of pieces. So maybe they think, this was like a 7. Okay, a good place to start. But now you want them to get a little deeper. And you have a bunch of things you can do. I'm just actually going to skip down here for a second. If you're using a rubric, so this activity, for example, asks students to create an argument. So as students are now going through and analyzing, and they're going to have to analyze well before they can give good feedback, right? They have to know what they're talking about. So as they're analyzing this piece of work, you can guide that analysis with a rubric that says, hey, by the way, here are the characteristics of a great argument. And you can now rate these specific characteristics. So notice we're really helping students to digest the work that they're ultimately going to give the feedback to, and then they ultimately give the feedback. So keeping in mind all the things you learned from the video and the website provided in the instructions, which by the way is always available. They can always jump back to these if they want. Given what you learned there, give some great constructive feedback, okay? That's part of the task, and in fact it can and should be part of the grade, as I'll talk about in just a moment. So off they go. They do all this with Peer 1, think really hard, try their best to give good feedback in line with what they've learned, then they do it again for Peer 2, then they do it again for Peer 3, and so they're getting this what we call repeated structured practice, and they're really learning a lot about good quality feedback because first they had to try to produce it according to what they learned, and now they're looking for it in the work of the others. So that combination of production and then what we call ear training, looking for it in the work of others, that really, by the time they leave this phase, they have a really good sense of what good constructive feedback should look like, okay? So, cool, let's kind of jump back to here for now. That's what they've kind of gotten out of the step of giving the feedback. Now we're going to ramp everything up even more by putting them on the other side, putting them on the receiving end of the feedback. Now this has a little different, and this really explains why this process of giving and receiving feedback is so tricky. We have a very primitive system, and our primitive system, anytime it feels like we're being attacked, and that can be a very minor thing, by the way. That could be somebody saying, like, you're going to wear those clothes to that interview. That's sort of an attack on our judgment, so to speak. Anytime we feel any kind of attack, our body has a very natural response to either fight back or run away, the fight or flight response. And it's ingrained in us. It's very deep. Now notice, when we want students to learn from feedback, we don't want them to do either of these things. We don't want them to fight the feedback, and we don't want them to run away from it. We want them to sit there and think deeply about it and learn from it. And so the point I'm making here is that this is not natural. This is something that students really need experience with and need support to learn how not to fight or flee and how instead to stay and analyze and learn, okay? So we're going to try to do that with a lot of support in peerScholar in this third phase. So remember, the third phase, they're now seeing the feedback their peers have provided, and they're going to be asked now to assess the feedback. And I want to kind of highlight this. When I started this large group thing, we talked about, the challenge of a writing assignment in a large class is the cost and time needed to give all these students feedback and a grade. But now let me add to that, most students don't even look at the feedback that you've spent a lot of time and effort doing. And those that do look at it don't tend to think about it too deeply. In peerScholar, we're going to make them look at it, make them think about it deeply, and they can actually be asked to even use it. So these are some of the things, again, we're going to use the instructions as a chance to kind of calibrate people and make sure they know what we want them to do when they're analyzing feedback. We want to support them as they analyze the feedback, and you'll see how we do that. And we can actually, after they've analyzed the feedback, ask them to use the feedback in a formative way, which really enhances the learning that they're getting when they actually try to employ certain things suggested by peers. So now they're putting the feedback into action. And we can also ask them to reflect on everything after the fact, which really kind of ties everything together. So let me just show you that now. So I'm going to go back to the student side, and I'm just going to jump to a third phase of activity here. So this student now submitted something. They've already assessed their peers. Now they come into peerScholar, and this is their work on the right here. What they're seeing here now is peer one's assessment of them. Okay, and so they might see the rating, they might see rubric things, and they would see, most importantly, the constructive feedback. And so now what we ask them to do is actually assess that feedback. This is where we give them the structure. I'm sorry, I have to backtrack just for a moment. Just I think you kind of know what's coming here, but I forgot to highlight the instructions that they would get when they come in. And in these instructions, again, we're teaching them more about what feedback is, but we're also including a video of the value of learning from feedback. And so this is a TEDx video, a little bit longer, but it's a really good video to show the value of what the students are learning. So this is all part of the calibration. Again, I'm sorry, I should have done that first. Then we throw them into it, but then as they assess the feedback, they have to rate it. And so it can be things like this. How useful was it? So these first two questions are trying to teach students to separate out the usefulness of the feedback from the emotions that that feedback causes. Okay, and so that is that fight or flight response. You can't totally get rid of it, but you can hopefully allow students to recognize it. Yes, this does make me emotional. They can, name that emotion as one of the best ways to deal with it. So maybe they feel, I don't know, angry, embarrassed, and enlightened. Once they read the feedback that came to them. And then they can hopefully get past the emotion. Now, what I've done here, just to show you, is how we can really structure their analysis of feedback. These are the points that were made in that first video about how to give good feedback. So for example, one of the points that she made was, when you're giving constructive feedback, you should focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the work, but not put any of this onto the person. So it's not the strengths and weaknesses of the person you're reviewing, it's the strengths and weaknesses of the work. So are you careful when you're writing the feedback to do that? And so maybe as they're looking at this peer's feedback, they say, yeah, I'd give them 4 stars on that. They didn't really make it personal. Okay, did they use the sandwich approach? This is a recommendation. Start with something positive. Then get into the sort of thing that could be better in the middle, and then end positive again. So they call that the sandwich approach. Did this person use that or not? And so maybe they'd say, yeah, they sort of, but not really. They could have done it better. Did they give you a specific sense of how you could improve your work? So was it this vague abstract thing, or were there clear, explicit examples and other things that allowed you to really understand what they were saying? Maybe this person did a great job at that, so we'd give them a 5. Was the feedback realistic? Did they actually suggest things that are doable? And you hope so, but maybe this person didn't. They had these great ideas, but there's no way you could have implement what they're suggesting. So you might say, no on that. And did the reviewer own the feedback in the sense they presented it as their opinion rather than as fact? Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll just leave it there. Any bit of feedback is opinion. That's a big part of peer feedback, by the way. Students are told that some of this feedback will be really great, some not so great. So a big part of processing feedback is deciding for yourself what you think is good and what isn't. Okay, so the suggestion here is that when you're giving the feedback, you should present it with that sort of mentality. This is what I think, etc. And so maybe this person did really well. Again, now what we're doing is we're structuring their analysis of the feedback, but in the process, we're re-strengthening that notion of what good feedback actually looks like. Okay, so let's say they go ahead and they do that. And of course, they're going to do that for peer 2's feedback, peer 3, peer 4, peer 5. So repeated structured practice of doing this. Okay, now they've analyzed all 5 of their peers. Well, now we can actually say, okay, now that you've done the analysis, here's your original draft. Make it better. You've had 5 peers give you advice. You may have even thought some of their advice was really good. How can you now use that to make your work better? This is a tough thing for students. They find it difficult because we don't give them a lot of practice. But within peerScholar, you can absolutely do that. You can give them the practice revising their work. So let's say they do that, and while they're doing this, of course, they're making decisions about which peer feedback to incorporate and which not to. And so if you really want to cap off the experience, any peerScholar phase, you can add some questions at the very end. And so one of the ones we added here was a justification of the revisions. Please use this space to show us you've thought deeply about the feedback you received. Do this by explaining how you revised your work to integrate the feedback you found useful, but especially in cases where you ignored suggestions, provide your rationale for doing so. So now we're taking students up to a meta level, you know, really thinking about the changes they made and didn't make and why and what the reasoning is about that, okay? So let's jump back here. So again, we give them a lot of structure when they give the feedback, and now we give them a lot of structure and a really deep learning experience as they're digesting the feedback. Okay, the best way to get them knowing and understanding what good feedback looks like from both sides. All right, so again, just to kind of zoom out now, no matter what your original peerScholar activity might be about, developing writing, developing oral presentation skills, developing nursing techniques, whatever it may be about, that's cool. But in addition to that, every time peerScholar is used, you are giving students very valuable experience learning how to both give feedback in a powerful way and how to analyze feedback and alter our behavior accordingly. Personal growth, you know, in the light of feedback. And again, unlike the traditional method where students may or may not pay much attention to the feedback, within this method, that is part of the activity. We are actually asking them to actively consume the feedback, make changes, and justify changes they did or didn't make. So we're really kind of amping up the learning that's going on there, which is a very, very valuable thing to give to our students. All right, so there we go. That's webinar number 3, Mission Possible Large Classes. I just always want to end by saying we are here and we would really love to work with you in terms of bringing your students ultimate success. If you'd like to use peerScholar in class, if you think this sounded great, connect with us. We can get you started all ready for the summer if you're interested. But for any other questions, issues, if you'd like a much fuller demo, please reach out to us, info@peerscholar.com. And I will stop there, except we will open the Q&A. So I'm going to open my Q&A box. If anybody has any questions at all about what you've heard, please fire away. Well, I'll drink a sip of coffee. Wow, I've answered all your questions. Okay, who's got constructive feedback for me? What could I have done better? Come on, you know, don't remember the sandwich technique. Say something nice first and last, and then like let me have it in between. Nothing. Couldn't do anything better. Wow, cool. This is quiet. It's like crickets. I can probably get a cricket noise on my Mission Impossible theme. So really, okay, well, if there really are no questions, that's very cool. But I seriously, for those of you who've been to all 3 of these webinars, I thank you very much. Very cool. I look forward to working with many of you. And again, if you missed any of the webinars and you now think, wow, that sounded like one I would have liked, we will send you links to all 3 in a follow-up message. And of course, info@peerscholar.com. Anytime you have any questions or want to connect with us in any way, we would love to chat with you. All right. So I'm sensing no further questions. And so I guess we will wrap it up there. So thank you very much. Have a great spring, everybody. It is coming. I'm sure of it. Okay. Bye-bye.